Do not believe everything you read about O.J. Simpson. For example, survivors of his victims are not getting $58 million. May it please the viewers, I'm Rich Schoenstein, and this is So Sue Me, the show about civil litigation. And you may have seen it reported in the news that O.J. Simpson's estate has agreed to pay Fred Goldman, the father of Ron Goldman, $58 million. In fact, everybody is saying. We've got Fox News. O.J. Simpson estate agrees to pay Fred Goldman decades after wrongful death case. We've got ABC. O.J. Simpson's estate agrees to pay $58 million. We've got NBC, same thing, agrees to pay nearly $58 million. CBS, O.J. Simpson's estate agrees to pay Ron Goldman's father nearly $58 million. Not to be undone, TMZ reports a $57 million claim and says Fred Goldman may seem cash at last. And closer to home, the New York Post, O.J. Simpson estate signs off on $58 million for Ron's father decades after the shocking murder. So you've probably heard of this story, right? O.J. Simpson was a famous football player, and in June of 1994, his ex-wife Nicole Brown and her friend Ron Goldman were found stabbed to death outside of her apartment in Brentwood, Los Angeles. It was a brutal murder, and Simpson became a suspect. There was a bizarre chase in this white Ford Bronco that interrupted Game 5 of the NBA playoffs in 1994. I remember this so well. I was at Madison Square Garden watching the Knicks go up 3-2 on the Houston Rockets. Don't get me started on that. That's a whole other story. OJ was in the back of this white Ford Bronco being driven by his friend through Los Angeles. And we were sitting, this is before smartphones, right? You didn't have an iPhone to watch this, but we were sitting in the audience in the crowd at Madison Square Garden looking up, and the luxury suites all had this image on the screen. A white Ford Bronco, O.J. Simpson in the back. We didn't know what was going on. And then more action in the NBA Finals as the Knicks took a 3-2 advantage that wouldn't last. Well, enough about the suit. O.J. Simpson was tried for murder. He was acquitted. Norm Macdonald was fired by Saturday Night Live for making a lot of jokes about it, and subsequently a civil suit was pursued by the families of Nicole Brown and Ron Goldman, and a civil jury hearing the case found Simpson liable for the deaths and ordered them to pay more than $33 million. That's where we left off. Now, what's happening now? This is where we are. O.J. Simpson died last year, and his estate is being administered by a court in Clark County, Nevada. There is an estate executor named Malcolm Laverne. Fred Goldman filed a creditor claim in July of 2024 for $117 million, and there was a lot of publicity at the time that the estate was refusing to pay that amount, that the executor wouldn't pay it. In fact, it was just a dispute about the calculation of interest. The estate denied the claim because they didn't think that the interest was calculated correctly, and apparently the parties have had negotiations since and have tried to work out a proper number, and that's how they've come up with this number that's approximately $58 million. There is a resolution of the amount of the claim, but that doesn't mean it's going to be paid. Reportedly, the estate has less than $1 million. I guess it has some memorabilia that they're hoping can be sold. I question who wants O.J. Simpson memorabilia at this point, but so be it. There are pending tax claims in line ahead of this civil judgment in favor of Fred Goldman, and unfortunately, Goldman may end up getting nothing or nearly nothing. His attorney was quoted as saying that acceptance of the claim was a positive acknowledgement of the debt and added it does not constitute payment. The acceptance allows the administration of the claim to move forward in probate. We will continue to monitor the probate process as it progresses. So there you are. There is no payment necessarily going to Ron Goldman or Fred Goldman, and certainly not a payment of $58 million. A couple of points about this. The first is a reminder. One of the things the O.J. Simpson case teaches us is civil litigation can be a powerful tool. This was a hard-fought, divisive criminal case where the jury came back with a not guilty verdict that really stunned the country and created a lot of debate and a lot of dialogue about the nature of a jury trial. Obviously, race played a big role in the narrative that was at this trial and what went on. We found out there was some pretty bad police work here that really hurt the case about O.J. We've seen that kind of thing creep up in cases 30 years later, including very recently. Bad police work can really hurt what should be a pretty obvious prosecution. For whatever reason, O.J. was acquitted. In civil litigation, though, there's a different burden of proof. In the criminal case, you have to prove guilty beyond a reasonable doubt, and in a civil case, you only have to prove a preponderance of evidence, or what we call more likely than not. And faced with that, faced with the evidence, and probably facing a slightly less charged event than the criminal prosecution, the jury came back with a guilty verdict and with a number, $33 million, which seems kind of light. I guess it's a larger number back by 1995 standards, but seems kind of light now. So that's one point. Civil litigation can be somewhere you can go if you don't get the result, if you don't get the outcome in criminal case that you want. You can try civil litigation, and it can be a different result. The second thing I would say is that this case shows again that civil litigation can be pointless if there's no pot of money at the end of the rainbow. You can get the biggest verdict in the world, but if there are no assets there, you may not have a way to collect it. And if there's nothing in that estate, the victims' families are going to be left without any recovery or without any substantial recovery. Now, I would say in this particular case, it may have been very important to the families to get a public declaration from a jury of O.J. Simpson's guilt. That may have been important to them, completely separate and apart from the money, and it may have been worth pursuing the litigation just for that. But I'm sure it would have been nice to have the money. The last thing I will say is you got to be careful when you're following the reporting on these cases. Just putting up a headline that they've been ordered to pay $58 million, that's not true. That's not what's happened in court. That's not what's likely to happen in court. And that headline got repeated over and over and over again by most of the outlets. All that happened is they agreed on what that verdict would be worth plus interest 30 years later. They've come up with an amount, they've put in the claim, but there's no chance it's going to get paid. And actually, pretty little chance it's going to get even a substantial payment. All right, thank you very much for watching. Again, we're calling this series So Sue Me. It's all about different topics in civil litigation. I did not expect to be talking about the O.J. Simpson case so early, but we're going to cover developments as they come out, and here we are. O.J. Simpson back in the news 30 years later, and I'm rooting again for my Knicks. Thanks for watching. For now, we are adjourned.